I used to think the worst part of my life was over. When I left Chicago, running away from a divorce, debts, and painful memories, I bought an old wooden cabin on the edge of the Ohio woods at a fair price, and I told myself, this is where I start fresh, just an ordinary American guy, looking for a quiet life, a steady factory job, morning coffee, and deep, dreamless sleep. But unfortunately, this dream turned into a nightmare far worse than my previous life. The person I thought was my friend is the reason my life became a living hell. I was driving my old car on a winding highway in Ohio on a cold autumn afternoon in October. The trees were shedding their red leaves, looking like frozen blood. I had left my job in Chicago, seeking a quieter life in a small town called Riverside. A new job opportunity at a local factory promised me a clean slate after my bitter divorce. The road was almost empty, and the sun was slowly setting behind the hills. It gave me that classic American feeling of freedom I had always dreamed of. A lonely man building his future in the heartland. I stopped at an old gas station on the side of the road to fill up and grab a hot coffee. That's where I met John, a man in his 40s wearing a worn-out leather jacket and a baseball cap. He said he was stuck after his truck broke down. He seemed completely normal, talking in a local accent about American football and the economy, so I invited him to ride along to town. Over the next hour, we shared stories about life, laughed at silly jokes, and I felt I'd found a potential friend in a strange place. We reached my new home, an old wooden cabin on the edge of the forest that I'd bought cheap online. John helped me carry a few boxes, then left on foot after I gave him my phone number. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in months, but I woke up at dawn to a faint sound like footsteps on the roof. I thought it was a squirrel or the wind, so I rolled over and went back to sleep. The next morning, I noticed the kitchen door was slightly open, even though I had locked it tight, and there was a small spot of mud on the floor. I didn't think much of it. The town is quiet and people are friendly. I spent the day organizing the house and calling work. In the evening, I went to the local pub where I heard stories about drifters wandering the surrounding woods, but everyone assured me they were just rumors. When I got back, I found a coffee mug I'd used that morning, washed and turned upside down on the table. I felt a slight chill, but I blamed it on my own forgetfulness. John called me the next day to ask if I was okay, so I invited him over for dinner as a gesture of gratitude. We talked for a long time about our dreams, and how America is full of opportunities for those who work hard. But when he left, I noticed he knew exactly where the spare key was under the planter, without me ever telling him. In the days that followed, things started accelerating slowly. Sounds of light furniture moving upstairs while I was gone, food disappearing from the fridge, and the smell of cheap cigar smoke drifting from the bedroom. I called the police once, but they said it was just wild animals or my imagination. I was working nights at the factory, coming back exhausted, trying to convince myself that everything was normal. By the second week, the anxiety turned into real, escalating fear. I'd get home from my shift around 2 a.m, and I'd find muddy footprints inside the house, bigger than my own, clearly visible on the carpet. I started installing a cheap security camera I bought from Walmart, but it only recorded mysterious shadows moving in the corners. John visited me again, acting sympathetic, suggesting I change the locks and telling me about a friend of his who had a similar break-in. He helped me check the house and pointed out a hatch in the attic that had been closed before. We climbed up together and found an old blanket and cigarette butts, but he said it was probably from the previous owner. That night, I heard heavy breathing close to my bed, so I turned on the light immediately. but the room was empty. The next day, I discovered my phone had deleted text messages from an unknown number. "You're living my life now." I called the town police again, and an officer named Mike came over. He checked the place and found unidentified fingerprints, but he advised me to move to a hotel temporarily. I refused. I'm not a coward, and this is my new home in the America I built with my own sweat. I started sleeping with my gun by my side, a gun I bought legally a week after I arrived. John started visiting me daily, bringing food and staying for hours, talking about his past in the military and how he lost his family in an accident. I felt comfortable with him, but he knew small things about me I had never mentioned, like the color of my underwear or my habit of drinking coffee black. One night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. I grabbed my gun and went up quietly. I found the attic door open, and inside, someone sleeping on the floor. But they vanished before I could get close. In the morning, there was a message written in blood on the mirror. "This has been my home for years." The police took samples and confirmed that an intruder had been living in the walls or the attic for some time. I started feeling like I was going insane, watching every corner, avoiding sleep. John tried to calm me down, but he seemed tense too. The events were logical. A drifter who knew the house well, sneaking in while I was gone, using spare keys. There was nothing supernatural. Just other humans stealing your life, slowly. By the third month, the horror reached its peak in a way I never expected. I had changed all the locks, installed extra cameras, and reported to the police daily. But one cold night, I returned from work early because of a malfunction at the factory, and I heard a muffled sound from the bedroom. I entered quietly, gun in hand, and found John himself sitting on my bed, wearing my clothes, scrolling through my phone. He looked at me with completely calm eyes and said in a normal voice, "You're finally back. I've been waiting for you." It turned out he had been living in the attic for months before I even arrived, having escaped from a nearby prison after being convicted of burglary and murdering his ex-wife in a neighboring town. He had been sneaking through a hidden hatch in the ceiling, watching me, eating my food, and building a friendship to slowly take control of my life. I tried to fire, but he was faster. He hit me hard on the head with an iron bolt he'd been hiding. I woke up tied up in the attic, hearing his voice talking downstairs with the police over the phone, claiming I was the attacker. Blood was streaming from my wound, and the pain was burning my body. As I realized my life had ended right here, in this house that was supposed to be a new beginning. I never saw his face again, but I heard his car driving away, and the sound of police sirens slowly approaching. Now, after weeks in the hospital, I live in constant fear. I wonder if he's back, or if there are others like him waiting in the shadows. The town is quiet as usual, and people are talking about the unfortunate incident. But I know the real horror isn't in monsters. It's in the neighbors who smile at you while they steal your soul. The end hasn't come yet, and maybe it never will. I was driving home from Detroit after a long shift, thinking about my wife and little daughter waiting for me. The rain was pouring down hard on the Michigan highway, and visibility was near zero. Suddenly, a massive truck appeared in front of me, crossing the yellow line. I screamed, tried to hit the brakes, and then a violent collision. The car flipped 3 times before landing in the ditch. I woke up in the hospital 3 days later, my body shattered. The doctor told me, You're lucky to be alive, but the chronic pain will be with you for a very, very long time. I moved to the remote town of Lakeview in northern Michigan seeking treatment. There I met Dr. Richard Harrison, a man in his late 50s with neatly groomed white hair, calm blue eyes, and a paternal smile that made you feel like everything was going to be okay. If I had known that the same hands that would fix my body were the same hands that would destroy my life, I would have preferred to die in that crash. After the accident, I suffered from excruciating pain in my spine. I arrived in Lakeview in early winter, the snow covering the streets and the wooden houses looking quiet and safe. Dr. Harrison was well known in the area as a chronic pain specialist. His clinic was in an elegant, old building on the edge of the lake, its walls filled with degrees from prestigious universities and photos of smiling former patients. During my first visit, he sat with me for over an hour, listened to the story of the accident in detail, examined my spine gently, and spoke in a calm, reassuring voice. "I will give you your life back, my friend." He started me on a new treatment called Vitalorex via weekly injections, along with supplementary oral medication. He said it was experimental, but highly effective and locally approved. For the first 3 weeks, I felt real improvement. The pain subsided, I was able to sleep for more than 4 hours straight, and I even returned to part-time work at a local auto shop. But gradually I noticed I was forgetting simple things. Where my car keys were, the names of my coworkers, even what I'd had for lunch. I blamed it on the medication and the exhaustion. I'd wake up in the morning to find new bruises on my thighs or arms that I didn't remember getting. I started finding voice memos on my phone in my own voice, talking about things I didn't remember, appointments, complaints, even confessions of severe pain. I called the doctor and he reassured me, saying these were normal side effects, that my brain was just adapting to the medicine. The neighbors in Lakeview praised him constantly, calling him the town miracle, saying he had helped so many people who suffered accidents, and some of them had completely changed their lives, and then left town suddenly. His wife, Margaret, a nurse at the clinic, would call me in the evenings to ask how I was doing, in a warm, comforting voice. One night, I woke up inside my car, parked in front of a strange house, the snow covering the windows and my watch showing 4 a.m. I had no memory of how I got there. I went back to the clinic, panicked and terrified. He gave me an extra dose and said my memory would improve. I felt relieved for a moment, but doubt began to slowly creep in. The doctor just smiled calmly and said, "Trust me, we have the situation under control." By the end of the second month, the anxiety turned into true escalating horror. I started losing entire hours of my day. I'd leave the workshop at 2 p.m, then suddenly wake up at 8 p.m, sitting in a restaurant I didn't know, and the waiter would tell me I'd been sitting there for 2 hours. I found strange things in my pockets, car keys that weren't mine, and a note written in my own handwriting that said, "Don't trust the doctor." I checked the shop's security cameras and saw myself leaving early, wearing a strange, eerie smile. I went to the police, but they just called Dr. Harrison, who assured them I was suffering from PTSD and that my condition was under control. During one of my visits, I noticed Margaret looking at me with a strange expression, as if she knew a secret. I started questioning everything. At night, I'd hear a faint whispering inside my head, voices talking about things I hadn't done. One night, I woke up standing in front of the bathroom mirror, my hands stained with dried blood, and a knife on the floor. There were no wounds on my body. I called the doctor, panicked and furious, shouting at him, "This damn medicine you're injecting me with has ruined my life. I feel like I'm another person. someone I don't recognize. Dr. Harrison. Right now, I wish I were living with the pain from the accident instead of this ruined life. He came to my house in the middle of the night and sat beside me saying, "You're safe with me. We'll change the treatment plan. Don't worry." I saw him smile a different kind of smile. My doubts turned into certainty. This doctor is a fraud. He's deceiving the townspeople and the neighbors. Or perhaps they were all in on it together. The next day, I called the doctor's wife to book a checkup at the clinic. It was scheduled for 8 in the evening. I went to the clinic and found it empty. No patients. The nurse asked me to wait a moment. While I was waiting, I heard the nurse whispering into her phone, mentioning the name of a patient who had died years ago. I remembered reading news about that patient. He had committed suicide after losing all his money, killed his wife, and suffered from severe psychological disorders. In that moment, divine intervention stepped in to save me, and to save others from this human monster stripped of all humanity. Suddenly, I found the doctor leaving the exam room, leaving the door open. I took advantage of his absence and the nurse's preoccupation with the phone call. I snuck into his office and opened his drawers. I found files of former patients. All of them had suffered memory loss, bruises, and strange behavior, then either committed suicide or disappeared. He was using a mix of experimental drugs to partially control their minds, making them sign documents, transfer money, and cover up his own crimes involving the trafficking of illegal pharmaceuticals. I was the perfect victim, a man alone after an accident, with no close family. I left the exam room quietly and asked the nurse to schedule another appointment. The following night, as I was trying to flee the town, the doctor knocked on my door quietly. He was carrying his medical bag, wearing his usual paternal smile. He said, "I came to give you the final dose that will cure you completely." I tried to close the door, but he was faster. He pushed me hard and injected something into my neck that made my body freeze instantly, while my mind remained fully aware. He confessed everything to me in a cold, calm voice. He had been using his patients as puppets for years, stealing from them, making them commit small crimes under the influence of the drugs, then getting rid of them when they started to remember. His wife was his partner in everything. I woke up hours later in the clinic's basement, chained to a cold metal bed, listening to the sound of dripping water. I tried to scream, but he returned and injected me with another slow-acting dose. Before I lost consciousness completely, he whispered in my ear, "You're going to sleep now. And when you wake up, you won't remember a thing." I was saved by chance. An anonymous tip reached the FBI. I still don't know who made the call. They found me at the very last second. Dr. Harrison had fled with his wife hours before they arrived, leaving behind a file portraying me as mentally unstable. Now, I live in a distant village. I don't want anyone to know where I am. I'm partially paralyzed and I take antitoxin and anti-hallucination medication that doesn't fully work. Every night, I wake up in a panic, feeling my arms for signs of new injections. I don't know if the drug he gave me is still slowly working inside my blood. I don't trust any doctor, and I can hardly sleep. My life has turned into a permanent hell. The horror wasn't the accident, nor the pain. It was trusting the hand that promised to heal. And I know that somewhere he's smiling and planning for another patient. Or perhaps he's coming back to finish what he started. Getting a decent job here in the States wasn't easy for me. But I finally landed one, and I thought I'd finally found the job that would change my life. After years of unemployment back in Oklahoma, I got a contract as a long-haul truck driver for a small transport company in Montana. The pay was good, the routes were breathtaking, and it offered the freedom I'd always dreamed of. I bought a cheap, used rig and set out on my first trip through the frozen mountain roads. On the third night, while I was driving through a severe blizzard, my truck suddenly died on the side of a completely isolated road. I didn't know that this simple breakdown would turn my life into a never-ending nightmare, or that every decision I made after that was bringing me closer to the end. It was 2 a.m, and the snow was coming down hard. I tried to start the truck over and over, but nothing. I called roadside assistance, but they said they wouldn't be able to reach me for hours because of the storm. I waited inside the cab, shivering from the cold despite the heater. An hour later, an old pickup truck pulled up behind me. 2 men in heavy work clothes got out. They said they were local maintenance workers and knew all the quirks of this truck model. They helped me efficiently, fix something in the engine, and refused any payment. I invited them for a hot coffee in the cab. We talked about the tough life in Montana, hunting, and the economy. They seemed like 2 perfectly normal guys. I got back on the road and reached my destination late but safe. The next day, I noticed some tools in the truck's box were arranged differently. I blamed it on exhaustion, but on the next trip, the real trouble started. The truck would shut down suddenly in isolated spots, always in the middle of the night. Sometimes I'd find footprints around it when I woke up. Then I started noticing stranger things. A message written on the back window in the condensation. "Thanks for the help." I called the company, and they sent a mechanic who said it was just a minor electrical issue. But the tension began to build. I started sleeping less, double-checking everything a dozen times. On one trip, I woke up to the sound of an engine running outside the truck. But when I looked, there was nobody there. The psychological pressure was mounting. A constant feeling that I was being watched on the long road, and that every stop could be a trap. As the weeks passed, the tension turned into a suffocating, escalating terror. The truck was now breaking down regularly, always in the same remote mountain areas. One time, I stepped out to check the engine and found a wire that had been cut professionally. I called the company, but they started questioning my competence. That came the worst part. I started finding personal items inside the cab that didn't belong to me. Old family photos, a keychain, even a small child's shoe. When I asked the company, they denied any involvement. At a rest stop, another truck driver approached me and whispered, "Stay off Route 27. They don't like strangers." When I asked him who he meant, he took off immediately. I started doing my own digging. I discovered that the 2 men who helped me that first night worked for a small gang that used trucks to smuggle drugs across the border. They were planning their goods inside my truck during these staged breakdowns, using me as a cover. When I started getting suspicious, they began to pressure me psychologically, leaving signs, cutting my communications, sending veiled threats over the truck's radio. One night, I found a message written in blood inside the cab. "If you talk, your family back in Oklahoma will pay the price." I called the feds in secret, but they needed stronger evidence. The horror was in the total isolation of the road, and the fact that every mile I drove could hold death, and that I had become an involuntary part of something much bigger than me. On my last trip, I decided to end it. I brought a recorder and a hidden camera, and I headed back to the same spot where they usually stop me. The truck stalled just as expected. I stepped out and heard voices nearby. I watched them trying to open the back trailer. I filmed them, but they caught me. A short chase broke out in the snow. I was shot in the leg, and I went down. One of them admitted everything before he hit me. They were using new drivers as cover, killing anyone who refused to cooperate or tried to report them, and making it look like natural accidents on the mountain roads. I woke up in a small hospital after a highway patrol unit, who just happened to be passing by, rescued me. But the local police didn't act. Some of them were tied to the gang. The company fired me on the spot, accusing me of sabotaging the truck. The 2 men are still on the loose, and I'm living in an unknown location now. I walk with a limp, and I look over my shoulder on every road I take. Every night, I hear the sound of falling snow, and I imagine the sound of approaching engines. My life is no longer my own. The road that once represented my freedom has become my open grave. The real horror wasn't the bullet or the threat, but the fact that simply helping 2 strangers on the side of the road turned me into a target. And I know they will never let me go.